Good evening. Welcome to the final edition for the summer of the remote online version of Daf Yomi. The Daf Yomi for this week is sponsored by Rabbi Aaron and Evelyn Kislasi in honor of the birth of a grandson, Binyamin Yisrael, to Shua and Yael Weiss. Mazel Tov, and should bring you nachas and nachat and simcha and enjoyment and be wonderful. So we are on the Mishnah Nun Beis Amud Beis. The Mishnah says, "Oved kochavim mevatel oved ovedes kochavim shelo." A non-Jew, as we've discussed in the past, is able to nullify the idolatry that is his, vishel chavero, and he can also nullify another non-Jew's idol. V'Yisrael, but a Jew, ein mevatel avodos kochavim shel oved kochavim. A Jew cannot nullify idolatry that belongs to a non-Jew. And obviously his own, because his own can't be nullified at all by anybody. Hamvatal oved avodos kochavim mevatal misham sheha. If a non-Jew nullifies an idol, so then not only is the idol nullified, but all of the service utensils that are associated with that idol become nullified at the same time, right? By domino effect. Bital misham sheha, but if the idol worshiper just nullifies the utensils, so then misham shemutarin Vehi asur, then the utensils are permissible, but the idol remains prohibited. He just wind up with new utensils. Okay, says the Gemara. Masni lo Rebbe l'reish lakish berebbe. So the Rebbe, who's Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, right, told this to Rebbe Shimon berebbe, the words of our Mishnah, that he said that Ove Kochav Mevatel Avodas Kochavim Shelo, that a non-Jew is able to nullify the idol worship that's his, Vishel Chaveru, and also idol worship that belongs to his friend. Amar Le Rebbe, and Rebbe said, Shaniso Lanu B'Yal Duseich, you taught us when you were younger, Ove Kochav Mevatel Avodas Kochavim Shelo Vishel Yisrael, that a non-Jew is able to nullify idolatry that belongs to him and a Jew as well. Di Yisrael Mikma Law. Now, how could that be? Because after all, you can't nullify a Jew's idolatry, as we've said, so it wouldn't work. V'ha, because the pasuk says v'sam b'seiser ksiv. The pasuk says that he puts it into private, and we explained that it needs to be put away. That a Jewish person's idol has to be put away into private location when we try to get rid of it. It can't simply be nullified. It has to be stored in a geniza and gotten rid of. So Amar Rabbi Hillel Brei de Rebbe. Valas. So Rabbi Hillel, the son of Rabbi Valas, said, "Lo nitzracha sheyesh lo ba shutfus biyalduso b'shutfus." He says, no. The case that we were dealing with is where the Jew and the non-Jew had a partnership in the ownership of this idol. That was what we were talking about. So biyalduso maikasavar. What did he think at the beginning when he was younger? Ubizakinu so maikasavar. And what changed his mind when he got older? Biyalduso savar. When he was younger, he thought that Yisrael adata de ovid kochavim palach. That why is a Jew worshiping an idol? He's got a partner who's a non-Jew worshiping an idol, and he figures that the reason is because he's trying to impress his non-Jew. So therefore, if the non-Jew decides I'm not worshiping the idol, so then it will cascade into also nullifying it on behalf of the Jew as well. Because the Jew's not really worshiping it for himself, he's worshiping for the idolater. Once the non-Jew is going to nullify his part, to Yisrael nami mevatla, so then the Jews as well. So that's what he thought to say when he thought at the beginning that a non-Jew can nullify a Jewish person's idol. It's not a standard case where the idol belongs to a Jew. It's a case of partnership. Ubizakinu so, but then he changed his mind as he got older. And why? Unfortunately, he realized that a Jewish person who's a partner in an idol, he has his own interests in worshiping that idol. And so therefore, since it's his own interest, that cannot be nullified. When a non-Jew nullifies the idol, he can only nullify the part that's his. The Yisrael Lobatel, he cannot nullify the part that belongs to the Jew because he's doing that for himself. So that is version number one of the story. Ikedemasni la seifa. Some people told this back and forth on the next part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Yisrael eino mevatel avodos kochavim shel ove kochavim. A Jewish person cannot nullify the idolatry of an idolater. So pshita, that's obvious. A Jewish person can never nullify any idols. So Amar Reb Hillel Brei de Rebbe Volas. So on that is where we're going to quote this Rabbi Hillel, the son of Rabbi Volas, to say, Nun Gimel Amid Aleph, Lo nitzracha sheyesh lo ba shutfus. We're talking about a case, again, that there's a partnership, right? This is a circumstance of partnership. The Kamash Malon, Yisrael hu dulo mevatel, that this comes to tell us that even though there's a partnership between a Jew and a non-Jew, the only part of this idol that can't be nullified is the Jewish part. The non-Jew is able to nullify his own part. Ovi kochavim, right? The Jew can't nullify the non-Jewish part. Ovi kochavim dinafshe mevata, but the non-Jew can nullify his own part of it. And so we might have thought that since it's partly owned by a Jew, there's no nullification at all. That's not true. Even the non-Jew can still nullify the non-Jew. Only the Jew can't nullify the Jew's portion. Ekademasni law abraisan. Some people said this statement back and forth of Rabbi Hillel was not anywhere near this Mishnah. It was about a brisa. And the brisa says like this: Reb Shimon ben Menasya says, "Avodas kochavim shel Yisrael. If you have idolatry that belongs to a Jewish person, ein la betela olamis. It can never be nullified ever. My olamis. What does that mean? Forever. So on that, Amar of Hillel braid to Rabbi Valas. So that Rabbi Hillel, the son of Rabbi Valas, said, Lo nitzracha elo sheyesh lo ovi kochavim ba shutfus. We're talking about a circumstance where there's partnership. Right? Obviously, a Jew can't nullify his own idol. What is this talking about? There's a partnership. The Kamash Malon, the Yisrael Adata de Nafshe Palach. You might have thought that there is a circumstance where a Jew could nullify it, where he's got a partnership and the non-Jew is nullifying his portion. And since the Jew is relying on he's only doing it for the sake of impressing the idol worshiper, so that his section could also be nullified. No, it can never be nullified at all under any circumstance because the Jew worships for his own reasons and therefore he can't nullify it. Okay, so that was basically, again, the summary of what we just did. We had this statement about partnership that the Jew can't nullify his portion of the partnership, non-Jew can nullify his part of the partnership, and we just had three potential places where that comment could have been made in reference to, right? Different part of our Mishnah, the first part of our Mishnah, second part of our Mishnah, or on Brisa. Next Mishnah, Ketzad mivat law. What is the method that a non-Jew can use to nullify it? Kata rosh ozna, he can cut off the top of its ear, right? That indicating he's not happy with this. Rosh chutma, its nose. Rosh etzba'a, the top of its finger. Pachsa, he dents it. Ava bishalo chisra, even though he doesn't actually knock any piece off of it, bitla, then he's nullified it. Rak bifaneha, if he spits in its face, hishtim bifaneha, he urinates in front of it, garura, he drags it, zorak bas, that somebody throws feces at it, harezu ena bitela, that is not nullifying it. As we discussed previously when we quoted this Mishnah, that's because those actions are not permanent. They represent a momentary anger that this idol worshiper has for his idol, but eventually he'll make up with his idol and get back to it and everything will be okay. So therefore, it has to be a permanent sort of a damage to the idol to indicate that he's nullifying it. Machra, if he sells the idol, mashkina, or he takes a loan and he uses the idol as security on his loan. So Rebbe Omer Beetle, Rebbe says that nullifies the idol, right? Why would he sell an idol? Perfectly good God, right? Everybody's looking for a good God. So therefore, if he's selling it or he's using it for financial for his mortgage, so then he's nullified it. The Chum disagree. Lo bitel, he has not nullified it through those actions. We'll see in the Gemara what is the rationale behind those points of view. Yes, Brian.
I was going to say, the Manda Omer that says that he mavatled it, could a Jew buy it from him if he sold it to a Jew?
Yes.
Interesting.
Right? If he's, according to the thing that says that he's selling it and nullifying it through that sale, then yes. And that's going to be part of our Gemara that's coming up. Okay, so says the Gemara, Kilo chisra b'mai bitla. Okay, so the guy takes a baseball bat and he hits the idol and he dents it. So, but he hasn't caused it to lose any part of the idol. So how's that nullifying it? So Reb Zara shepachsa bifaneha. What he did is he smashed it in the face, and by doing so, he's defaced it in a significant way, deformed the idol in a significant way. That nullifies it. Then we said rakak bifaneha v'hishtim bifaneha. So if he spits in it or urinates in front of it, so minani mili. How do I know that does not nullify it? So Amar Chizkiah says, Damakro, the pasuk says, V'haya kir of v'hiskatzef, non-Jews, they'll get hungry and then they'll get angry at their gods, saying, why are we not getting fed? V'kilo b'malko, and they are go ube'elohav, they'll curse their king and their gods, upana lemala, and they'll turn upwards to Hashem. They'll say, Hashem, please save us. Uksiv basrei, and then afterwards, when everything gets back, they'll turn around and they'll say, they'll turn around and look back towards the ground again. And there's suffering and darkness there. So even though at a certain point they'll curse or they'll deface their gods, and they'll look up to Hashem, eventually they turn back to their idols. So therefore, if it's not a permanent damage to the idol, it's not nullified. Now he said next, machra o mashkina. So if he sells it or he takes a loan out and uses it as security, Rabbi Omer Bitel, Rabbi says that nullifies it. So Zeiri Amr Rabbi Yochanan, Zeiri said Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Amar Rav, they said the name of Rav. This Aleph. Chad Omar, that's what that is. Chad Omar. One of them says, Machlokes betzorif ove kochafim. Okay, now they're selling this, and this is Brian's question. What's going to happen to the idol when they sell it? So one says that if they sell the idol to another non-Jew, aval betzorif Yisrael, divrei akol bitel. If they sell it to, this is a question about whether they sell their idol to another non-Jew. So what's the logic here? If a person is selling their idol, it sounds like they're not going to worship anymore. But if he sells it to another idol worshiper, then potentially he's just handing the idol over to another guy so that he can worship it. So if he's just selling it from person one to person two, so he can sell, that's not nullifying the idol. That's the argument. When he sells it, is he nullifying it? Or is he selling it in order for it to be sold, to be used by the next person? So this argument, so the way that we're reading this first is the machlokes is if he's selling it to get to a person who's he's a forger. He's a person, he makes metal, right? So he collects scrap metal. So this guy is if he's a non-Jewish person, so then that's where there's an argument. Why did he sell? Is he trying to nullify it or not? But if the person who he's selling it to is a Jewish person, so then divrei akol bitel, for sure he's nullifying it. Because why is he selling it to a Jew? He knows the Jew is not going to keep it. He's going to melt it down for the metal. So therefore, he's clearly nullifying it by selling it to a Jew. The Chad Omar, and the other says no. Betzorf Yisrael machlokes. The argument is when he sells it to a Jew, because he might think that the Jew understands the value of it, and he'll sell it to another non-Jew. However, if he sells it to another non-Jew, for sure it's not nullified. So the argument is whether he sells it. So now, Iboilu. So he asks the following question. Betzorf Yisrael machlokes. Now, if you're going to say that the argument is if he sells it to a Jew, so then, aval tzorif ovi kochavim divrei akol lo bitel, or is it like I just said, that when he sells it, if he sells it to a non-Jew, for sure he's not nullified it? Oh, Dilmar, are you saying bein bazeh machlokas that it doesn't matter who he's selling it to? It's always an argument. Okay, so we've got three different possibilities here. Possibility number one, the argument is if he sells it to a non-Jew, but if he sells it to a Jew, it's for sure nullified. Our potential number two, he sells it to a Jew, that's where the argument is. But if he sells it to a non-Jew, we have two other possible ways to look at it. Either it is not nullified if he sells it to a non-Jew, or the argument is both when he sells it to a Jew and when he sells it to a non-Jew. So Toshma, come and listen. To Amar Rebbe, Rebbe says, Nirin divarai kishemachra lechavolo. So if the person, he says, if the idol worshiper is selling the idol to destroy it, so it seems like my way of thinking is correct, that it's nullified, right? It sounds like if you're selling the idol to be melted down, so then it sounds like I'm right. V'divrei chaverai, and the other opinion, the other point of view sounds correct. Shemachra la'ovdah, if he sells it to somebody else who says, I want to worship the idol. So, my lechavala, my le'ovdah. What does that mean that we're using it in order to destroy it? And what does that mean to use it? So, if he means that he's selling it to somebody who says, I am planning on melting the idol down. So, and le'ovdah mamish, and to worship it, he's selling it to somebody who says, I plan to worship it. So then my time demand amar bito, my time demand amar lo bito. So then it's obvious whether he's nullifying it or not. You're selling it for destruction. He's selling it literally about to toss it in the fire. That's for sure nullified. And if he's selling somebody's going to worship it, that's for sure not nullified. So that's not the issue. Ella, rather what we mean to say is, Elav lechavala lemisha osid lechavla. What he means by destruction? He's selling it to somebody who is likely to, in the future, destroy it. That would be a Jewish person, right? Umanu Tzoref Yisrael. That's the Jewish person. The Jewish person is likely to destroy it. Therefore, if he decides he's going to sell it to a Jew, that is considered destroying it. Le'ovda, and as far as worshiping it, that means Lamisha Asid Le'ovda. He's selling it to somebody who in the future would worship it. And Umanu, and who's that? Tzoref Ove Kochavim. That is the idol worshiper who's the non-Jew. Ushmami na, now you can see clearly from here, Bein Bazeh Ubein Bazeh Machlokes. That what did Rabbi Yehuda say? He said, my point of view looks right in this situation. The Rabbanah's point of view looks right in the other situation. Well, that means they're arguing in both situations. Rebbe is just admitting that the other point of view looks right in one circumstance while his looks right in the other. But they clearly are arguing in both. Otherwise, what's the point of making the statement that my way is right in this case, their way is right in the other case, right? If they were agreeing, you don't say my way is right in this case, your way is right in that case. You just say, we all agree. So the answer is low. That is not really what's going on here. Rebbe is not saying that there's arguments in both cases. Hachi kamar, this is the way that you understand what Rebbe is saying. Amar Rebbe says, Nirin divarai lechaverai keshamachra lechavala. My way of looking at things is correct, that it is destroyed that is nullified when you sell it for destruction. And how is that? Umanu tzoref Yisrael, you sell it to a Jew. Sha'af chaverai lo nechleku alai, because the rabbis don't even argue with me in that case. So he's suggesting that there's no argument in the circumstance where he's selling it to a Jew. And that's going to answer our question, right? Where was the argument was not. Now we're saying the argument is not where he's selling it to a Jew. If he's selling it to a Jew, for sure it's nullified. That's what Brian had asked. Ella kishamachra le'ovda, but if he sells it to a non-Jew, aval lechav, then right, because they don't, lo nechleku alai ella kishamachra le'ovda, because they don't argue with me except when they sell it to a non-Jew, somebody who's going to worship it. Aval lechavala, but if they are going to destroy it, moduli, they agree with me. Okay, so now, Meisvei. So let's ask a question on that. If that is correct, right? You sell it to we're selling it to a Jew, everyone agrees it's nullified. That's what we're suggesting now. Halokeach grutos min ha'ovdi kochavim. Somebody's buying scrap metal, right? Pieces of silver from a non-Jew. Umatzo bahen, and as he's going through the scraps of metal, he finds amongst the pieces avodas kochavim, a little idol in there. So im adshlo noson mos moshach. So the Jew hasn't necessarily paid for it. So what should he do? He should take the idol and give it back, right? He shouldn't accept it. He doesn't want it, so he shouldn't accept it. So once he's moshach, once he grabs onto it, yachzir, he needs to give it back to the non-Jew. Because it's a mekach tos, right? It's a false sale. He never intended to buy an idol. It just turned up in the package. So therefore, he should give it back. Now, what happens though if he took it and he paid already? So then, yolich liyam melch, you throw it in the Dead Sea. Well, why can't he just return it and get a refund? The answer is, the Chacham did not want that to happen, because if you do that, it looks like he's selling the idol back, right? And now the Jew, it looks like he's selling an idol that belongs to him to a non-Jew and getting a profit out of it. So we don't want that. Say, yes, there's no return policy, right? Or there is a policy of no return, right? There is a policy, there's a no return policy, right? Not there is no return policy, right? So, so fine. Okay, so now, here comes this Jew. The idol worshiper sold this bag of parts to the Jew. Now, if there's an argument between the Rabbanon and Rabbi on this, so money, who is this point of view? It's the Rabbanon. This would be the Chachamim's point of view, that the idol worshiper, when he sells the idol to the Jew, he doesn't nullify it. Therefore, it's still idolatry. Therefore, you can't keep it. You've got to give it back or you've got to throw it away. But if you're going to interpret it as we just said, that the only argument is if the non-Jew sells it to another non-Jew, but if he sells it to a Jew, it's for sure nullified. So hamani. So then there's no opinion here. Nobody agrees with this. Because the idol, if he sells it to a Jew, is perfectly fine for the Jew to keep. right? That's what Brian asked at the beginning, right? The Jew has no problem keeping it because it's for sure nullified. And that's according to Rabbi and according to Chachamim. So therefore, whose opinion could this be? So Shani Hasam, no, this case is different. Why? Da data de grutos zovin, adata davoros kochovim lo zovin. Because when he sold him this idol, he didn't intend to sell him an idol. He intended to sell him a bag of parts. So now that he finds in the bag of parts an idol, that's not nullified. If the non-Jew sold him and here's an idol, I'm giving it to you, right? Then that's clearly he's nullifying it. But it's possible that the non-Jew did not realize there was an idol in the bag and therefore it never got nullified. So therefore, if he sells it as part of a collective group of spare parts, then the Jew can't keep it. But if he sold it to him, he said, here's the idol, then it would be for sure nullified and the Jew could keep it. Okay, Tanar Rabbanan, Rabbi Zord. Lova Allah, O shenafla la mapol. Okay, Lova Allah. So let's say a circumstance that the idol gets nullified. The idol belongs to a non-Jew, of course, and the non-Jew takes out a loan and he uses it as collateral for the loan. O shenafla la mapolas, or the roof collapses and it buries the idol. O she ganvua listed, or it gets stolen by thieves. O she nichu habalim. Or the owners left it and they moved away, right? They left it there, they moved, and they left their idol. Set Nun Gimel on the base. So the person moves into the house and he finds an idol in the garage, right? So that is all those are nullified. Now, im asidin lachzor kemilchemes Yehoshua, if they're going to come back, like in the war of Yehoshua, we're going to see, what are you talking about, the war of Yehoshua? The people who were the enemies didn't come back. They got chased out of Eretz Yisrael. So what's going on there? We'll see in a moment. So Eina Betela, then the idol is not nullified because the guy plans to come back. He has not nullified. He's just planning on coming back. Now, Utsricha, I need all of these cases that are considered nullified. Why? Deitana lova aleha, if you only told me the case of where it was used for a loan, midalo zavna lo batla. If he intended to nullify it, he would have sold it in order to get the money. Why didn't he sell it? He didn't sell it potentially because he was hoping to be able to maintain ownership of the item, right? Therefore, that's first case. Nope, that nullifies it. He wouldn't put a lien on his god. Aval nafal lemapoles, but right, if a house collapses on it, midelo kamafni law, since he doesn't go searching for it, right? If it was important, if it was his idol, he'd start digging out, try to get it. So ema betuli batla, we would say he's for sure nullified it. So tzricha, so I need that case. Vitana naflo lemapolis. Now, if you tell me that the idol is nullified in the case where the roof falls on it, mishum de savar, or that maybe it wouldn't be nullified in that case because mishum de savar ad manechas kol emas de ba'ina le shakilnula. Look, it fell, has a roof collapsed on it. It's safe here. Nobody's getting it. So when I come back with some equipment and I need my idol, I'll uncover it. But right now, there's no rush to get it right now. So just because the idol worshiper is not uncovering it now doesn't necessarily mean it's nullified. Aval ganvua listim, but when it comes to thieves, midaloka mahader abasra, why isn't he running after the thieves? But tuli batla, for sure he's nullified it. So tricha, I need that case. V'itana ganvua listin, if you told me that it's nullified that's not nullified in the case of the robbers, mishum desaver, that might be because he holds because where's this idol going to end up? It's going to end up in the hands of some thieves that are either Jewish or they're not Jewish. If they're not Jewish, maybe they stole it because they want to worship it themselves. Well, I'm not going to nullify the idol. I'll let them worship it. Yisrael shakla, and if a Jew stole it, so I need to yikarin, since it's valuable, mizavin lolove kochavim, the Jew will turn around and sell it to another non-Jew and make a profit off of it. So he's not going to nullify it there either. Upalachla, this non-Jew is going to worship it. However, the circumstance where the owners leave this idol alone, and they go overseas, since they didn't take their idol with them, bituli batluha, they would surely nullify it. So tzricha. So these are the circumstances. All of these are telling us, right? So they are all these circumstances that they are nullified under these circumstances. Right? So as long as the idol worshiper does not plan on coming back and getting it later, right? If the idol worshiper plans on coming back and getting it later, it's not nullified. Okay, next. Um, Im asidin lachzor kimechemes Yeshua. One of the things that we said, which was interesting in that last statement there, was that if they're going to come back in the future, and we threw in this line, like the war of Yoshua, Eina betela, then it's not nullified. Midi milchemes Yoshua mehadar hadar. But the non-Jews didn't come back after the war with Yeshua. They got killed or they ran away. So what are we talking about? Hachikamar, this is what it means. Im asidin lachzor, if they are going to, if these non-Jews plan to come back, harehu kimilchemes Yoshua, then the idolatry becomes like the idols that were discovered when Yeshua came into Eretz Yisrael, ve'ein la batal, and they are not nullified. Right? When Yeshua came in and they found all of these idols in the land from the previous owners, those idols could not be nullified. So
Oh, yeah, the name after named Very.
Amen. Why are we attaching these two things together? So the answer is milsa agav urche kamashmol, and this is telling us an extra thing. Ki hadam Rabbi Yehuda amarav, that which Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Yisrael shezakaf levena lishtachavos la. Let's say a Jew decides that he's going to worship a brick. Now we said in order to worship this brick, he has to do some kind of action to it to indicate that it's being established and set up as an idol. So he turns it on its side. So now it's standing up. He's about to worship it, but he doesn't worship it yet. And we said a Jew, when he makes an idol, right, until it's worshipped, it's not prohibited. But Uba Kochavim comes a non-Jew, V'ishtachav Allah, and he bows down to it. So Asra, he has prohibited the brick. Now, it's not his brick, it's the Jew's brick. What gives the non-Jew the ability to prohibit the brick by bowing down to it if it's not his? So Minolan de Asra, how do I know that the non-Jew can make this brick prohibited? Rabbi Elazar explains, Ketchila shel Eretz Yisrael. It's like the beginning story of what was stolen, Yehuda. You're talking about the brick?
Yeah, the brick.
Well, no, this is the Jew's brick, right? If it was stolen, we're saying the Jew stole it. No, the brick belongs to the Jew, right? We're going to see in a second why what gives the Jew what. Hang on, you'll see why the non-Jew has the right. Okay, so the Jew is setting it up. The non-Jew is the one who is worshiping it. Nevertheless, it becomes prohibited. Why? Because it's like when Yeshua came into Eretz Yisrael. How does that work? The Torah says, you have to burn up all of their Asherah trees. Michti. Now let's take a look at this. Why do we have to burn up all of the non-Jews' Asherah trees? Yerusha hi lahem me'avosehem. The land of Israel was an inheritance that we got from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So the land doesn't belong to the non-Jews that were there. Vein adam oser davar sheina shelo. So these non-Jews are planting Asherah trees and they're worshiping these trees. What gives them the right to make that Asherah tree an idol? It's not theirs. So therefore, in reality, the non-Jews in Eretz Yisrael should not have been able to prohibit any of the trees in Eretz Yisrael because it wasn't their trees. So if you're going to tell me maybe there were trees before Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and those trees were the ones that were worshipped. Yes, Brian.
When did the Yerusha kick in?
Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov.
But then why? But you see Avram buying Maras Machpelah.
Yeah, and so that is one of the nisyonos that Avram goes through. Despite the fact that he is really the owner, because Hashem promised it to him, he nevertheless pays full, and that's unjust, and he could have a claim against Hashem saying, hey, you promised me, why am I paying for my own stuff? Right? That is exactly where the nisayon comes in. So, according to this, they're learning it as he literally owned it as property. Lot had that argument with Avram, said, why can't we just graze wherever we want? It's ours, right? To which Avram said, not yet, right? But it seems like this Gemara is saying, look, it was theirs. It was their inheritance from this pasuk. Yerusha hi lahem me avosehem, right? That's what the pasuk says in Dvarim Yud Gimel, right? This is a Yerusha. This land is an inheritance. Is that where it is? Gimel? Yeah. So it's a Yerusha. No, that's not where it's from. Yerusha Hilachem. That's just the Gemara's comment. Yerusha Hilachem. That's not a pasuk. So it's a Yerusha. It's an inheritance that comes from your fathers. So therefore, if the land of Israel belongs to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the idol worshippers can't consecrate any of the trees. And so therefore we wouldn't have to destroy them because it wasn't really consecrated. The answer is maybe they are older trees. Maybe there are trees from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov's time. That's not so bad. You can have a tree that's 400 or 500 years old, right? So when they came into Eretz Yisrael after, whatever it was, even at 210 years they were in Mitzrayim, it's a 300-year-old tree, theoretically could be an Asherah tree. So that's still, yeah, Brian.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. But we did say earlier in the Gemara that if it was on somebody else's property, a person couldn't come and
a non-Jew could nullify another non-Jew's idol. Correct.
Right.
But here we're suggesting what gives a non-Jew the right to make a Jew's property into an idol? That's our question.
But didn't we say that he couldn't even make it he couldn't make somebody else's?
That's what the issue is. Correct.
Right.
The non-Jew cannot make another person's property consecrated as an idol. He can't do it. He can't.
Right.
If he goes and worships somebody else's stuff, that doesn't work. So why are we saying that it works?
Right.
So the answer is because, and we're going to suggest, okay, so maybe that the Jewish people had some kind of obligation to destroy some non-Jewish material when they came into Israel. Maybe we're talking about the 300-year-old trees, the ones that were originally idols from before. So the answer is that can't be because Bibitula Bialma Sagilu. They could have just kept a non-Jew around and told him, go nullify everything, right? Because a non-Jew can nullify the idolatry of his friend. So all they need is one non-Jew, give him some money and tell him to nullify all the things. They don't have to cut down anything. So the answer is no. What happens is like this. Mi depachu Yisrael le'egel. When the Jewish people worship the Egel Hazav, Galu Adaitu, they revealed that their intention was that they like idolatry. Therefore, the non-Jews who are establishing Asherah trees and other idols in Eretz Yisrael were doing it as good faith messengers for the Jews. Yes, the land belonged to the Jews. They weren't the ones doing it, but since the Jews revealed that they appreciated Avodah Zara, the non-Jews became their messengers in good faith. So Hachanami, so that's the case also, where the Jewish person has the brick, and the non-Jew comes and worships it first. Yisrael shezakaf levena galya adate denicha lebavodos kavim. It's clear that he appreciates the idol worship. V'chi also ovikochav mupalach. So when the non-Jew comes and worships it, shichusa didekavid, he's doing the messenger work of the Jew, and therefore that's why it becomes prohibited. Okay, so now that's what it means that if they're going to come back like the war of Yeshua, we're telling us this extra idea that during the war of that the idols of the war of Yeshua needed to be destroyed, right? So too, these idols, if they plan to come back, so then the only way to dispose of this idol is to destroy it. You can't presume it to be nullified. Who says the Jews want all kinds of idolatry? They don't want Asherus. They just like the Egel. They like the golden calf. That's a different story. Maybe they don't want any other type of idolatry. So the answer is, Amar Kro, the Pasuk explains that is not true about the Jews, unfortunately. Eila Elokecha Yisrael, these are your gods, the Jewish people. Melame She'ivu Le'elohus Harbe, that comes to tell me that they wanted many gods. The Jews liked all kinds of Avodah Zarah at that point. Ema Kol Debahadi Egel Nitzuru, Mikan Ve'elech Nishtari. So fine, okay. So any of the Asherah trees that were planted before and worshipped before the Egel Hazav, fine, those have to get destroyed. But anything since, the non-Jew shouldn't be able to nullify, to ruin. So the answer is, man muchach. How are you going to prove which ones are which? Right? You're talking about looking at a tree and not telling how long it's been worshipped. There's no way to tell. Therefore, all the Asherah trees in Eretz Yisrael had to be destroyed. Okay. Next Mishnah. Avodos kechavim shehinichua ovdeha b'shas shalom muteris b'shas milchama muteris. If a non-Jew leaves his idol and goes away from it during a peacetime, so then he's nullifying his idol. B'shas milchama, if he runs away during a war, asura, the idol is still prohibited because he's just running away. He's not trying to run away from his idol. Muzios shamlachim. Muzios are pedestals, but I wonder if the word museum comes from that word, right? It sounds very similar, right? A display, right? A display pedestal. That sounds like what museum comes from. I didn't look up where the word museum comes from, but it looks too close. So, right, these are these pedestals of the kings. What they would do in the cities is where the kings had his road, they would put up these pedestals and put these idols onto the pedestals so that the king would go down these roads. He would pay homage to the idols as he would go by. So hare elu mutaros, those pedestals are considered to be temporary, right? They're not significant, and therefore those are permitted. They're not idolatry. Because we put them up when the kings go past. Right? That's when they get put up. Okay, says the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Rabbi says Amar Rav, base Nimrod, the house of Nimrod, and I believe that we're referring to a house of Nimrod. We're talking about the Tower of Bavel. So the Tower of Bavel, harehi ka'avodas kochavim, it's idol worship. Shenichua ovdeha beshas shalom umuter, and the people, even though they left because they couldn't speak the same language, that's not considered a war. They weren't running away from danger. They left of their own accord. They abandoned it. And since it was abandoned, it is not prohibited to get benefit from. Afagav dechi badrinhu rachmana kishas milchama, even though Hashem chased them away from the tower like war, right? Like a war, like milchama dami. So iboy l'mahader hadur. If they wanted to return at any point, they could have. Midalo hadur, since the non-Jews never came back after the war was over. But too late, batla. It's clear that they've nullified. They stopped worshiping that thing, so they don't. Now, bimusyos shamalachim harelu mutaros. The musyos, these pedestals of the kings, those are permissible. Why should it be just because they put the idols on these things temporarily when the kings go past? Why should that make them permitted? So Amar Rabbi Chana says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hachikama, this is what it means. Because they put these idols on the pedestals when the kings are going past. And sometimes the king doesn't even go this way. He goes other ways. So therefore, these pedestals had lacking of significance. Ki also Ula, when Ula came from Eretz Yisrael, Yosef Bimsa Pegima. He sat on a pedestal that was a little bit broken, and he used it as a chair. Now, pedestals, we said, these are the pedestals that they put idolatry on. So how's he getting benefit from this pedestal? There we go. So the word museum originates from the ancient Greek word museon, which referred to open my chat. This is real-time investigation, which referred to a place or temple dedicated to the Muses, the 9 goddesses of the arts and sciences in Greek mythology. The concept then evolved through Latin, where it became museum and eventually entered English. So that does line up, right? These Muses, that would make sense that they put these pedestals to the Muses. Okay, that's good. Lines up. I don't know if those two, the word museos is related to the word museum, but they both are probably related to the original source, which is that they were used for the Muses. Yep. Okay. So now, okay, so he sits on this pedestal. So why? How was he doing that? So Amalei Rav Yehuda Ula. So Rav Yehuda said to Ula, "Bahal Rav Shmuel Damri Tarvayu." Both Rav and Shmuel, both of them said, "Bimus shenifkam aser." He says that even if you've got these pedestals that are a little bit chipped, they're still prohibited. Even according to the opinion that says, look, a broken item, right? They don't worship it. So therefore, the idol, right, break off a piece, it becomes not nullified. Hanimili avodos kochavim, that's the idol itself. Dezila be'milsa lemiflach lishvarim, because that would be beneath us to worship beneath the idolaters to worship something that's broken. Avahai lo ichpasle, but as far as a chipped pedestal, that's still usable. So therefore, they don't nullify a chipped pedestal. So therefore, you can't sit on the pedestal. It's still being used for idolatry. It's not nullified. So Marley, so he said, Man yohivlon me'afra deravu Shmuel umal inon einin. He says, if only we had the dust from Rav Shmuel and fill our eyes with it, meaning that Rav and Shmuel were so great. They say what's amazing things, and the dust of their feet we should put in our eyes, even that we should understand the depth, even that which they would trample on. So, Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish damri tarvayu. Now, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, both of them say bimus shenifkam is mutter. They say, okay. So with all deference to Rav and Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who are in Eretz Yisrael, Rav and Shmuel are in Bavel, right? Ula came from Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish in Eretz Yisrael, they said that a pedestal that is broken is permissible. Even according to the opinion that says that you do worship, they did worship the broken pieces of idols. That's only the idol worship. Why? Milsa live tula. Since they still worship it, so then right, since it was being worshipped in the past, the non-Jew might feel terrible about nullifying it because it was an idol worship before. So Avahani, but these broken pedestals, Shakli Lahayu Maisi Bumusachrino, they have no attachment to the pedestal. There's a broken one, they say, forget it, throw this one out, bring a new one. So they nullify the pedestals much more easily. Okay. And Tanya Kavasi Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. There's a brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish anyway, that these broken pedestals are fine. Bimus shenifgam mutter. If I've got a bimus that was broken, that's permissible. Mizbeach shenifgam aser. But the Mizbeach, the Beis Hamikdash, right, that gets broken, so that's prohibited. Ad she yinotetz rubo until right, this is the what's it called? The pedestal has to break most of it, right? It has to be significantly broken. It can't be minor chip, right? So hechidami bimus, hechidami mizbeach. What's the difference between a pedestal and an altar? So Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi. So Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi says Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Bimus even achas. A pedestal is a single rock. It's a single structure, right? Just a platform to be able to put something on. Mizbeach, but an altar is avonim harbe, is many rocks. Okay, so on to Nun Daled and Aleph. Amar Chizkiya Mikra. Where do I know that that's the definition of Mizbeach from? Because the pasuk says in Yeshaya, thank you, in Yeshaya, Beshumo kol av besumo kol avnei Mizbeach ka'avnei gir. When you make all of the stones of their mizbeach, of their idol worship, ground up like chalk, minupatzos, lo yakumu ashirim v'chamonim, then they will stop using it, right? If it's not significant, if they don't break their mizbeach up significantly, they'll keep using it. So you've got to break that mizbeach up significantly. I'ika ka'avne gir minutzafos lo yikumun. Ashirim vechamonim, right? If what it's telling us is if this mizbeach is completely destroyed, like ground up like chalk, so then they are not going to bring any more Asherah trees or other idols that are going to be worshipped for it. Ilah, but if not, yaklubu, then they're going to bring back more idols. They're going to fix up this meach and keep worshiping it. Pedestal is not like pedestal is one rock. They chip it, they damage it, they throw it away, right? And this mizbeach has to be completely ground up and destroyed. Okay. So that's why he was sitting on the pedestal. It didn't bother Ula. Tana, and by the way, that sort of means for us, right? You go to a museum, right? And you go to pay and you go see some kind of, artifacts that are idolatrous or something like that. So first of all, we said if it's a business venture or the like, it's not for Avodah Zara, presents no problem to pay in order to be able to go into those sorts of places. And theoretically, if you went to like some of these the pyramids or something like that, where they potentially were designated for the pharaohs or something like that. I don't know that anybody believes that they are prohibited to sit on or get any benefit from nowadays because they are not considered to be idolatrous or worshipped in modern times. So they've been nullified. Brian.
Sorry, I'm still confused about why the pedestal has to be broken. There was another Mishnah we discussed about finding things under Avodah Zara, and it was mutter. Why
Yes.
the pedestal any different?
So the pedestal is designed, we're presuming the pedestal is designed and set up for the purpose of holding up that idol. right? That would make it prohibited. Now, that's not to say that a pedestal could not be nullified, right? A pedestal could be nullified. As the Mishnah said, you could nullify it. But this is a pedestal they found, and they are just presuming it's nullified based on the fact that it has some cracks in it. Okay? Tana na'avid shalo aser v'shel chavero mutter. So we learned in a brisa, right? If an animal was worshipped, so if it was his own animal, so then it becomes prohibited. But if it's his friend's animal, so then it's permissible. Okay? Now, we're a mini, but we have a contradiction. Ezehu navad, what is the definition of a animal that is worshipped and therefore becomes prohibited to bring as a korban to the Beis HaMikdash? Kol she'ovdin oso, bein b'shogeg ubein b'mezid, bein ba'ones, bein b'ratzon. Any animal that is worshipped, whether negligently or on purpose, whether accidentally or willfully. So, how do you accidentally worship an animal? How does that work? So, lav kigon de'onos behemas chavero v'ishtachav Allah. Isn't the circumstance that it's not really by accident, it means forced, right? If it was forced willfully or unwillingly. So, how do you unwillingly worship an animal? So the answer is, it's simple. Bottom line is the person who worships the animal has to do it willingly. Otherwise, it's not an action. But the animal being worshipped doesn't have to be a willing participant. The way to do that is that the person is worshiping his friend's animal. Now, this just said that if I do it unwillingly, meaning the animal is being forced into service, it's prohibited. But why would it be prohibited? It's my friend's animal. So we have a contradiction now. Amar Rami Bar Chama explains, Lav kegon she'ansuhu ovdei kochavim v'ishtachava libehemto didei. The answer is no. You're right. If he bowed down to his friend's animal, that wouldn't make that animal avodah zara. You know what it means to be coerced? It's where somebody comes along and puts a gun to this guy's head and says, bow down to your own animal. Now he's forced. And then if he's forced, that's where this animal becomes prohibited for the use of Beis HaMikdash. And that's a significant action because it's his own animal. So Maskif lo Rabbi Zera. So Rabbi Zera says, but I have a problem with that. Ones Rachmana Patre. The Torah has a rule. If you're forced to do something against your will, you're not liable for that. You can't be held accountable for something you're forced into doing. So how could we have a case where somebody puts a gun to his head and says, worship this animal, and you're liable for worship, and the animal becomes worshipped? You didn't intend to do it. How do I know that that's the case? The pasuk says, "Ulenara lo taseh davar." When you have a woman who's assaulted, she's raped, so she doesn't get punished because it's against her will. So therefore, even though the avera might be a problem, it's not her avera because she's forced. So too, if a person's forced to do avodah zara, he can't be held accountable for that. Ela marava, so Rava says, no, really, hakol hayu bichlal lo se'avdim. So the answer is, look, everybody was under the prohibition. The pasuk says, nobody can worship any avodah zara. Ukesheparat lecha kasav, when the Torah says, v'chai bohem, you have to live, right? You're not allowed to give up your life. Lo shiyamos bohem, not to die. So yotza ones. So that means that somebody who is being forced with a gun to his head doesn't have to give up his life. And he should worship the idol. Okay? Doesn't have to give up his life. V'hadar kasav rachmana. But then the Torah says in another place, I know Yehuda was going to raise his hand. But didn't we learn in Masechus Sanhedrin, Yehuda is going to say that you have to give up your life with when you, I knew your question. And I was hoping to zip on by and answer it at the end, but I'll answer it now. This Gemara is according to
you beat me to the question.
That's correct, because you asked that question on Daf Chaf, Chaf Gimel Chaf Zayin when we had this, when the same opinion came up earlier, and that we decided this Gemara does not agree with the Gemara in Masechus Sanhedrin that we learned, and we don't hold like this. We hold like the Gemara in Masechus Sanhedrin that says that you do have to give up your life and not worship avodah zara under any circumstances, as is one of the big three. This Gemara does not hold that way. This Gemara, this opinion is different. This opinion says you do not have to give up your life in order to not worship avodah zara. So That is a clarity because you had asked it then, and I looked it up, and still the case. This is according to that opinion, not according to the opinion that we hold like. So,
Kach.
lo sechalu Hashem kodshi. The pasuk says you're not allowed to desecrate my name. Dafila ba'ones. Even if you're forced and you have to give up your life, you can't desecrate Hashem's name. So ha-ketzad. How are you supposed to fulfill both of these things? How are you supposed to not give up your life and give up your life? What are you supposed to do? Ha-bitzina ha-befarhesia. Depends if you're in private or if you're in public. If you're in a private circumstance, so then it's not chil Hashem. So therefore, you don't have to give up your life. But if you're in public, it's a chil Hashem. You have to give up your life. Okay, as we said, this is what I was going to say. That's not how we hold. We of course hold in public or in private. You give up your life and not commit adultery. Amru le Rabbanan le Rava. So the Rabbanan said to Rava, we don't hold like Rava, right? The Rabbanan said to Rava, Tanya de Allah. We have a brisa that supports your statement. Bimusyos shel ovdei kochavim. When we have these pedestals of the non-Jews, bishas hagzera, during the times that there is a rule obligating people to worship the idols, afal pisha gzera bat la osan, bimusyos lo batlu. So second. So even though the gezerah goes away, and they're no longer forcing everybody to worship these idols, the pedestals remain prohibited. They have not nullified those. So and so what does that show us? That shows us that despite the fact that the only reason anybody was worshiping these idols is because they were being forced, because it was an act of coercion during that time. And despite the fact that everybody was worshiping the idol through an act of coercion, the pedestals that those idols were standing on are still prohibited. So we see that a coerced act of Avodah Zara is considered still an act of Avodah Zara that can prohibit the item that's being worshipped. Well, says Rava, thanks but no thanks. Amar Lahu, he says to them, Imi shumha lo tisayon. If that's your proof, that doesn't help me. Why? Because Emar Yisrael mumar hava upalach la baratzon. There must have been there's potentially one Jewish guy who worshipped those idols, even though everybody else was being forced to. One guy wanted to. And as long as one guy wanted to, that made it into Avodah Zara that you can't nullify. And now those pedestals are prohibited forever. Rav Ashi Amar lo tema Amar ella vadai Yisrael mumar hayu palach la baratzon. So don't say maybe. It's not perhaps there was a Jew who did it. For sure, definitely there was a Jew who did it. If that's the case, there were always Jews who go and do the wrong thing. So therefore, there was somebody who worshipped it, and therefore that's what made the pedestals no good. So even though Rava holds like he holds, he says that Bryce doesn't bring a proof. Tizkia Amar kegon shenisach lavodos kochavim yayin al karneha. Chizkiah says, I will explain to you what the circumstance is that a person could be forced. We're still struggling with this. Rava says that there is such a concept as a person being forced to worship his own animal, therefore the animal becomes prohibited, which means that despite the fact that his action is not an action of Avodah Zarah, the animal becomes prohibited. That's how Rava said. Not liking that, now we're going to introduce something new. That is that despite the fact that we said that a person cannot designate his friend's items for idolatry and prohibit them, if he does an action of idolatry to those items, to those animals, that will prohibit them. Now, why does that make some sense? Because remember when we talked about stealing, that if somebody steals an item and he makes a change, a significant physical change to the item, that's when you've stolen the item and it becomes yours, right? So therefore, this person is literally stealing the item for idolatry. So this person, he goes to his friend's animal and he pours wine on its horns as a what do you call it? A pagan kind of ritual. So maskiflo Rav Adabar Ava. So Ravada Barav asked one question. Hi nevadhu. So hi bimos biamu. What do you mean that the animal is being worshipped? The animal's not worshipped in that case. The animal is just a pedestal for the wine. The wine is being poured on the horns of the animal, but the animal doesn't seem to have any relevance to the service. Visharye. So he said that would be permissible. Ella Amar Ravada. So Ravada says, I'll adjust the case slightly. Barava. Kigon Shanisach lo yain bein karneho. He pours the wine between the horns of the animal, making the animal significant in the process. David Bamaisa. By doing so, he's done an action to the animal, and despite the animal not being his, once he takes an action to the animal, then that prohibits the animal. Yes, Brian.
As I say, didn't we say before when we were talking about throwing rocks that the rock becomes is serving whatever it hits, it's serving the rock. So the wine would
Yes.
be serving when the wine
But
is
that was a
serving the cow.
miraculous rule. I don't know if that's the case
Right.
when it comes to all of Avodah Zara, right? Miraculous was a wacky sort of a thing. So
Okay.
they didn't they were asking on that, like, how does the rock become the Avodah Zara and the service the Avodah Zara? And it
Right.
sounds like from the context of that Gemara over there, that's purely a miraculous circumstance. I don't know that we could prove that for any other thing. I'm not sure of the significance of pouring wine between a horn versus on a horn, why one becomes an act of Avodah Zara and one is not an act of Avodah Zara. I will say I don't know. Yeah.
But also, like, it's not his animal still. Like, I
Correct.
understand, right? So it
But
shouldn't
he's doing
be.
an action to it. And so that overrides the ownership.
Oh,
Okay, that's what according to that's how Rav Adar Bar Ava is explaining it. V'chihad also Ula Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and now that which Ula said, he came from Eretz Yisrael, and he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Afal Pisha Amru Ha Mishtachave Lebehemas Kavera Lo Asra. Right, this is the point that you're making, Brian. It's a good sum up. Even though we said that if a person bows down to his friend's animal, that doesn't nullify, that doesn't make it prohibited because it's not his. So nevertheless, asa b'maisa, but if he does an action to it, then asra, then he does nullify, then he does prohibit it. Yes, Aaron. Aaron, you have to unmute. There you go.
Sorry. From what I remember, at Kriyat Yamsuf, Ben Israel were accused of being idol worshippers, and the angels complaining, why should they be freed, saved, since they're doing the same thing as the Egyptians? They're idol worshippers.
Yes.
Right. So at the end, they get saved, even though they committed idol worship. So I'm not sure how this fits into this whole thing about being doing Avodah Zara under duress, and forced to do Avodah Zara and being saved. And
well, I don't think that we're suggesting that it's impossible that a Jew only does Avodah Zara if they're forced, right? We certainly see that that's not the case. That there are lots of circumstances in history where the Jews did it on purpose. The only reason we bring up the forced part is to tell us that there was a different rule, which is that even if an item gets worshipped under duress, that item becomes prohibited to use as a korban in the Beis Hamikdash. So if you find that you've got a righteous Jew, but he's forced to do Avodah Zarah, and he doesn't intend to, then that's going to be, nevertheless, prohibit this animal. Now, according to the way we're learning now, this right Jew is not so righteous either, right? The Jew is doing it on purpose, but he is doing an action to somebody else's animal. We call it duress. The duress isn't on the people who are doing the Avodah Zarah. The duress is that the person who owns the animal has to concede that his animal is being used for Avodah Zarah without his permission. Yeah, Brian.
Sorry, it just completely contradicts what we learned before.
Yes.
It
puts an asterisk on it. We learned before that a person cannot make his friend's item into Avodah Zarah, and now we're saying he can if he does an action to it.
But didn't the case before say also he served it? He did
So
a
the case
mice.
we had before was he served it.
Right. So it's the same.
Serving it is, as we just said now, according to the way that Rabbi Yochanan is saying, he bows down to it. If a person bows down to his friend's animal, that does
Right.
not make the animal prohibited.
Right. But if he pours wine,
However, if he takes the animal, he does an action of Avodah Zara to it, then he does.
okay.
All right, so this is a good place to break. And we will, we'll take our break.